Good afternoon. I'm Lee Soo-jae, who's responsible for Big Data, CDO of Big Data Division of Seoul Metropolitan Government. This is the sixth session of this forum, and we are going to talk about potential and role of big data after COVID-19. And we have 4 speakers, and then we will have general discussion. So let me introduce you to the participants who are joining us offline. From my right is from Professor Jang Won-chul from Seoul National University, and from Statistics Korea, we have Director Yoon Ji-suk. And to my right is General Manager Kim Jun Ho from Shinhan Card. And we have Dr. Kim Minyoung from Korea Credit Guarantee Foundation, and Mr. Kim Sang-il from the Department of Urban Data at Seoul Institute, and Officer Kang Suyoung from Seoul Metropolitan Government, and then Chief Manager Bang Mo-kyung and Professor Jang Won-chul from Seoul National University, and Professor Do Seung-chul from Hanshin University. We'll try to carry out as lively a discussion as we can. So we would like to invite Dr. Kang Suyoung for the first presentation. And the title of the talk is One Day in Seoul, When, Where, and How Much Do We Travel? Good afternoon. I'm Kang Suyoung. And today, I will talk about the social mobility data and one day in Seoul, where people travel, and I'll try to visualize that. This is not technically thorough analysis, but we were focusing on how to visualize the mobility. This picture in the background is the daily trajectory of people's mobility, and it looks like some kind of fireworks. This is my content. First, I'll talk about what kind of data we used and how the people's mobility has changed, and what kind of detailed information we can gather from mobility data, and look at hourly visualization of people's mobility. Then let's talk about what living mobility is. Living mobility is using Seoul as origin and destination. So mobility, it includes mobility within Seoul or mobility from Seoul to Gyeonggi or any other region, or coming to Seoul from other regions. This comes from public data of Seoul City Government, KOT's Transportation Polygon, and KT's LTE plus 5G signal data. For Transportation Polygon, in order to develop living mobility, this is a new spatial unit that has been developed for living mobility. This is at a granular level. KT signal level data. Well, in the second session, we talked about mobile phone data. Signal data is the cell tower and mobile phone communicating. But KT signal data is unique because every minute the mobile phone communicates with the cell tower. So it has very high level of resolution. Living mobility data offers precious information such as departure, arrival time and space, and type of mobility, and the sex age of traveler, and travel time and travel distance. This is not available for tracking individuals. This is an aggregate level. This data is used and it's open to public through Seoul Open Data Plaza and Seoul Big Data Campus. And you can use the data from January of 2020. And we have test data. And the test data is included 24 months of data. During the COVID-19 pandemic, this shows how the mobility has changed. The x-axis shows from November of last year to October of this year. And the circled area shows major policies. The blue circles include declaration of alert levels, or declaration like we are going into the with COVID era. The blue circles shows elevation of social distancing levels. Green light circles show relaxation of social distancing levels. And the graph at the lower part shows bar charts, and this shows the number of living mobility, and the red circle shows the newly confirmed cases. The orange ones or the yellow ones shows new cases in Seoul. Before pandemic, in November and December 2019, compared to that, there has been 4 waves of pandemic, and from November last year to January this year, there has been most drastic reduction in the mobility, down by 30%. And the third wave started in July this year, 4th wave actually. And for the 4th wave, even though the new cases increased, you can see mobility recovering. The characteristics of living mobility is you can see the previous month data. I think in November, I think the mobility must have gone up, and we'll be able to see that next year. And this is previous was by hour, and this is by day. What kind of information we can tease out from living mobility? And weekday and weekend shows very different pattern. Weekend is quite consistent, and weekend is quite fluctuating. For example, the number of daily trips, weekend showed higher number than weekend. And this was October 25th, 2021, Monday and Saturday. And daily trips during weekend has gone up, so there is only 10% difference. But when the pandemic was at the peak, the difference increased to 20%. It shows average travel time and distance, and weekend it was higher than weekday, and spatial range was wider, much bigger for the weekend. If you look at the 2 pie graphs, this will show the clockwise part, and there is the mobility within same dong, and the mobility within same gu district, and mobility into different districts in Seoul, or mobility into other areas of metropolitan area. Others is very low. So you can see that weekend, more people are traveling out of the city. So the average time and distance increased for weekend. Next shows the number of people taking trips by gender and by age. And women moved around less than male. And during weekend, young people moved around more. If you look at the bar charts, the yellow stands for men, green women. During weekday, male moved around more than women. That is because male often commute more than women. Next, this shows the mobility type. For living mobility, there are 9 types, and that's determined by the origin and destination. One is residential, and then the other is for work or school related, and others. And if you combine the origin and destination, you can come out with 9 combinations. And I've shown just the 4 for simplicity. So compared to weekend, on weekdays, the number of commuters increased by 2 times. On weekend, 3/4 was home-based mobility. At the bottom, you will see bar charts, and it shows the mobility change by hour. One on the left shows the weekend, and during the day, in the weekend, as you can see, the commuting hours showed clear pattern. And this is based on the departure time. So between 6 and 6:02, there is a peak. But if you look at the destination time, the graph might be different. And this is one day in Seoul, 25th of October, Monday. It shows how the mobility of people can be represented. Let me show you how to read this PowerPoint slides. October 25th, 2021, Monday. So 5 o'clock. It's between 4 to 6 o'clock. The 2 pictures or the 2 maps shows the origin and destination. Origin and destination, arrival period, space. In the case of origin, there are 2 layers, the heat map and the network map. The blurred areas show yellow areas like Sindangdong and Cheoneo-il-dong. That's when a lot of people depart. In the case of network, the yellow is the origin, red is the destination, and origin, destination, that's included in both. The picture on the right-hand side shows Jongno, Yeouido, Gangnam. The number of people arriving in those areas is very big. The characteristics of this time is that early morning market located in Dongdaemun, and travel time and distance is bigger than average, daily average. So sometimes the travel time was almost 20 minutes longer. Let's look at the bar chart at the bottom. The yellow is male, green is female. The males in their 60 to 64 usually moved around a lot. This is 8 o'clock, 8 to 9 o'clock in the morning, and this is when people commute to work. The pie graph chart will show commute accounting for 65%, and home-based mobility is also part of commute. Commute here only shows regular commute, and home-based, some of that is commuting as well. In the top charts, the origin is main residential areas like Jingkwandong, Seochodong, Oryodong. Destination were usually Yeouido, Jongno, Gangnam, and Gasan. This is the lunch time. In terms of destination, Jongno, Yeouido, Gangnam. I work in Jongno at the same time, and many people travel around this time, and it's clearly shown here. And the weekend at the same time, when we compare the area, it is similar during the weekday, but Sangye, Hapjeong, these spaces appear. The bottom graph shows the comparison by age and gender. During weekend, younger people tend to move around a lot more than weekdays. This is midday. So home-based trips accounted for almost 50% of trips. And the characteristic here is that female above 60 moved around a lot. So based on this, people aged more than 60, we looked at if there was any disparity between different genders. Top is male, bottom is female, and the top, male above 60 years old, they usually go to Jongno, and women of same age tend to go to residential areas like Jingwan, Sangye, and Giltong. And the graph here shows the distribution. Distribution by space. Male, they go to Jongno most, but women, it goes down gradually, meaning that women have many more clusters than men. This shows 6 o'clock in the evening when people go home. So it will show the opposite direction of people going to work. And the right hand shows the trips to outside of Seoul and mini pet towns like Pyeonle, Misa, Wire, and the subway line 9. People use that a lot to go home after work. At the bottom, it shows people not going home after work. They usually go to Jongno, Gangnam, Sinchon, Yeouido, major business districts. This is 9 o'clock in the evening, showed almost same pattern as 6 o'clock in the evening. Let me look at the graph at the bottom. This shows overtime workers who go home late from work. And we looked where they usually start from, Jongno, Gangnam, Yeouido, plus Daehakdong, Sinchon. The college campus towns pop up. Last but not least, this shows midnight 24. And now Sindangdong, Dongdaemun markets pop up again. Compared to weekends, Sindangdong disappears and replaced by Hongdae University campus town and Seogyeodong. And we saw Sindangdong again between 4 to 6 in the evening. But here, the average travel distance and average travel time was shorter here. And by gender and by age group, in the previous case, middle-aged men moved around, but now younger males moved around more than the older males. So to conclude, living mobility data enables and identify mobility with high resolutions using cell phone signal data. In the case of today, I looked at mobility characteristics based on the originating timestamp. But this data includes a lot of time clusters, and we can look at that by the type of travelers, by gender, by age group. So we can extract much more information from this data. And in the next presentation, I'm sure the following speakers will explain this further. The future task is to visualize this and how to link that with urban policies and how to respond, how to allocate public services after COVID-19. And living mobility data could be used in much more diverse ways. Thank you very much. I have a video. Well, everything has slowed down because I've included a video at the end. But if you need further information, please click the URL at the top, livingmobility.xyz. And if you scan the QR code, you will be able to access the same URL. And then if you access there, you will be able to see heat map, network map. You will be able to manipulate it yourself. So you're welcome to try this map. So that's all I have to say today. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. So that was a very granular explanation of what living mobility is. Seoul Metropolitan Government is working together with a lot of private data to produce and develop big data, and that data is shared with the public through Big Data Campus. And for transportation policies, I hope we can use this data more actively. Let me move on to the second presentation and the changes in the mobility pattern of citizens of Seoul. Mr. Kim Sang-il from Seoul Institute.
Hello everyone. I am Kim Sang-il and I have used the same data to come up with the pre and post-COVID, how the population moves around. And I wasn't able to secure enough time to do my research, so my report could not be a perfect one, but I hope you can enjoy it. Now regarding the methodology, Dr. Kang already talked about it. It's quite similar to what Officer Kang Suyoung talked about it, so I'll skip that part. But in the pandemic time, what has happened, especially the living population, what about their movement and what about their network? And as a conclusion, how has the node-centered traffic pattern changes as well? Now, I'll skip this, but within Seoul Metropolitan City, you can see that we categorize Seoul City, and in the past there were many type of data that we can measure the movement, like the people who passes by, the information, it is included. And frankly speaking, in order to get the information about the people who moves around, they conduct survey once in every 5 years, but they don't understand every single things. So right after the survey, they try to analyze what has happened. But this time, the population's moving around, of course, it wasn't fully satisfactory, but the age, the time, the gender, those are things were quite helpful. So those were the benefit. In order to come up with the data, we have rearranged the data. For example, we try to abstract the age group. As it was mentioned, the starting point of the data and all the way, let me just tell you what has happened. This shows the background of COVID-19 pandemic. And I don't think I have to repeat myself, but if you look at this graph, you can see that this dotted line, the people who have completed their vaccination. So more recently, although there's a social distancing measures being applied, it doesn't reflect really well. So it's not related with the vaccine. And of course, I wish I can look at all the data, but we have categorized into 4 periods, so P1, P2, P3, P4. P1 is the time when the baseline, which means that when the data started, January the 5th until 11th is the P1, the baseline. And due to the pandemic, the time when the movement were very much limited is after 1 year has gone by. So the P2 happened, second wave, and recently is a P4. There's 1 year of gap. So there is also the concept of the previous year and intensity. Once again, we can compare that. Of course, we can analyze the weekend, but we didn't have enough capacity to do that. So we only focus on the trips that occurred on weekdays. So we added all of that, and then we came up with the average daily trip concept. So this is how we have done. What you are looking at right now is a total daily trips. About 22 million of the daily trips occurred. At the time we gathered, if the number of the trips tends to happen and decrease as the number of the new confirmed cases sharply increases, and we can count that this is one trip, and based on that, it's a 22 million number of the trips. And if you look at the curve movement, as it was mentioned previously, the confirmed cases number has a close relationship with the number of the trips. In the period 1 and period 2 and period 3 and 4, P3 was a time when the movement was very much limited. There was a drop of around 32% of the movement. And if you look at P2, the first wave when it arrived, about 25% have dropped. And you heard previously that more recently, as the people get vaccination more and more, the newly confirmed cases, even though it increases, still people's movement does not contract. And here you can see that between Seoul Metropolitan area, within Seoul Metropolitan area, and between Seoul to Seoul, and with the neighboring Seoul Metropolitan city area like Gyeonggi, Incheon to Seoul. The green colored number stands for Seoul Metropolitan area, the whole Seoul Metropolitan area, and we put that as 100. And the blue colored number stands for, when we look at P1 as 100, how much reductions has happened. So in these changes within Seoul, in P3, a lot of figure decrease has happened. So in case when they passes by Seoul, the reduction has actually happened much less. But the contents that I'm going to share with you, P3, the period P3 and P1, you can compare the value and you can evidently understand the differences between these two. Now this is about trip attractions. So based on the destination, how much movement has actually happened per day. So we are trying to understand, and using that figure, we show this graph. And within Seoul metropolitan area, we try to categorize by each gu, or gu means district, and compared with the Gyeonggi province district, you can see that within Seoul, there are a lot of movement. Of course, the area where there were a lot of movements or a lot of trips number, once again, it dropped drastically. This is about the trip production. Now, based on the departing time, we show this bar during the P1 period, around from 00 to 7 a.m., around 2 million people moved around, and the time during the time of going to the office, about 2 million, and during the daytime, 3 million moved around. And then we compare that with the P1, P2, P3, P4. P3, P1. If you compare the graph of the P3, you can see the outliner shows the overall shape. Compared with the previous time, a drastic reduction has happened, especially during the evening time or after evening all the way to the midnight. The departure time has dropped drastically. If you go to the P4, hourly trips, you can see that it's almost similar to the P1 time. It's recovered almost fully. So we see two characteristics. People who moved around during the luncheon time decreased, and during the dinner time, compare to the P1. P1 is a normal time, and it's not fully recovered yet. Now, we try to understand this increase of the trips in number. What's interesting is that during the commute time compared to P1, actually it increased slightly. And during the afternoon times, right after the lunch, during the afternoon times, once again, the movement or daily trips has rather increased compared to the pre-COVID time. I don't know if it's meaningful, but definitely the commuting time and afternoon working hours time, we can say that the movement or daily trips figure are almost normal to pre-COVID time. Now we have categorized these daily trips by trippers' age, and we compare P2, P3. As you can see here, P1 and P4, if you compare children below 15 years old or adolescent between 15 to 25, the number of the trips in age group younger than 25 was decreased more sharply than the other age group. And probably it's because they don't go to school, they stay at home and received online school education. So college students or high school students, they don't go to school. They stay at home and received online education. But by the P4, in the all age group, it's quite comparable to P1, especially people over 65 years old, their trips increased. Compared to the P1, actually, during the P4 period, there were a lot of daily trips. Now, in relations with the trippers' gender, if you compare male and female, the number of the trips were more reduced in the female groups than male. Especially during the P3 times, a drastic decrease happened in female time, sorry. And P4, the decrease ratio compared to the P1 in both male and female group are almost the same. Why did females' trip number decreased? Why? First, it's because the economically active population, definitely there are more males than female. That's one reason. And second, there are schools where only female go to school and they all stay at home, receive the education. That's why the females movement dropped. Now we try to analyze the destination regions or average trip length by origin. And we've done the review, and in each destination regions we have connected that, and we try to come up with the average trip length increase regardless of the regions or internal trips. And Seoul Metropolitan area, on average, they moved about 9 kilometers. Within Seoul, about 4 kilometers. From Seoul to Gyeonggi or Gyeonggi to Seoul, about 21 kilometers. But by the P2 times period, everything increased. It means in case of the short distance, you can choose it, but in case of long distance, you cannot choose it. That's why. What's unique is that when P3 happened, average increased and the trip length within Seoul increased, but the trip length between Seoul and Gyeonggi or Incheon province actually decreased. By P4 times, it recovered almost fully, but trip length, rather, it decreased. So that's the phenomena that we have seen. What you are looking at right now is daily trips by trip length. And we try to understand by using this as a histogram. And you can see that P1 and P2, these are a gap between the number of the trips. And regardless of trip distance, a significant decrease has happened. As you can see here, please take note of the graph on the left. The black line stands for normal status or a P1, and the red line stands for P3, where it suffered drastic decrease. P4 is a recovery period. In case of P3, below 2.5 kilometer of the trip length, actually it decreased, but between 2.5 to 5 kilometer, the density actually increased. So on average, if they move around, people whose trip length is longer, it becomes longer, and those whose trip length is shorter, it becomes shorter. Now, during the recovery time of P4, the shorter distance density increased, but the longer distance actually decreased. So that was the interesting thing. Now I have drawn trip OD network. I wanted to give a more realistic feeling, and I don't think that I could reflect this. So Seoul Metropolitan City has its basic plan, and I wanted to show this in the task. So I tried to show if you look at the link, shows a trip of origin destination pairs which are greater, and the thickness and darkness is proportional to the number of the trip. The size of the circle is proportional to the internal trip, and Seoul, as you know, has 3 centers. During the P1 time, 99.75% of the quartile, you can see that about 3,200 trip has occurred. So we try to show the proportions of to the number of the trips. And you can see like Jongno and Gangnam, Yeouido, and also the regional subcenters like Gasan Center or Sinchon, and also the area where the lines are thicker. Those are the centers that we have regarded. Of course, the center does not actually stands for its own intentions, but the center system that we operate once again shows a trip network. It reflects the trip network, and we hope they can be operated in a much better way. Now this is P3 and how it has changed. I don't know if you can see it clearly from there, but the gray colored area is the time of the P1, and we started drawing network during the P1 time, and then on top of the P1 we put the P3 network. As you can see, in case of the P3, 3,200 of the trip movement happened, but all the link, when it happens, the link disappears, and there are only 3 centers, Gangnam, Yeouido. So that's all we have. So more than 60% of the links among the specific centers and outside Seoul shows subsided number of the trips. I know that it's hard to understand, but I will elaborate as we go to the back slide. Now this is a time-based patterns. And as you can see here, from the 7 to 11, which is a commuting time, you can see that the movement patterns for the rest of the centers decreased. City and district is the criteria that we have adopted, and comparatively speaking, it seems like there are a lot of movements. So it seems like Seoul and Gyeonggi area, it is linked, but if we go to P3, you can see a lot of network disappeared. And just have the feeling how it moves around. This is evening time. What's interesting is that during the evening time, there are a lot of movement going to Sinchon area. However, when the COVID-19 was in its peak, like P3 times, the trip patterns decreased actually during the peak time. Male and female, they have a different network. patterns. And I tried to look for that, and we found out that the reasons are there are locations where women's university is located, and that's why there are a lot of females movement. And now, during the P3 period, the movement of the male, and this is female movement of the P3 period. So these are the way that we try to understand the dissolutions of the network. And depending on the age, between 15 to 25 years old, that's the middle to high school students. Most of their trips happens inside Seoul, Gangnam, and Sinchon. And when it becomes P3, or area with a similar trip pattern to P1, you can see that the movement has totally changed. Now, age between 25 to 35, they just got a job or starting their jobs. They're not married yet, or they're about to get married. So that's the age group, and this is the network. You can see that most of the trips in and out from the metropolitan area, the northeast area of Seoul, was decreased drastically. So, the trip network changes that I have explained demonstrate the changes in centrality. Of course, there are countless ways to measure this centrality movement, and I just want to briefly show you that using the degree centrality and agent centrality, I try to calculate that. As you can see here, their centrality differs a little bit. There's a positive relationship between degree centrality and eigen centrality, and also based on the concentration level, it differs. So the centrality of these two, you can see that it's quite huge, but they show a different tendency, especially in the case of Yeouido, the bio degree is lower, but eigenfactors or eigencentrality is high, and once they go inside, they don't move around, so they work as if they are an island. And now it shows us changes in eigencentrality, prestige, centrality index, and the rank. And the blue color one is the time of the P1. And as we move to P4, the centrality moves around as well. In the network of P1, the centrality of commuting network before the pandemic is observed highly only in some areas, and compared to P1, it is observed the centrality of the task in P4 relatively higher, and after pandemic, P2, P4, the distributions of the centrality shows relatively less skewed. I don't think I have much time left, so I will skip a couple of pages. And here, I'm trying to show the changes in eigencentrality during the commuting time, the area where the rank was decreased and the area where the rank increased. And eigencentrality absolute power has not decreased, but if you look at here, the purple colored one are the area where it shows the greatest change, and green color is the lowest area. And if you look at here, P1, between P1 and P3, eigencentrality actually decreased, and I tried to show the trips of the area where eigencentrality was decreased. You can see that whether it is Yeouido or it's a central area, you can see that eigencentrality decreased. Now, this one here is interesting. Eigencentrality increased in the area of Yongsan or Cheonho Gildong area during the commuting time. Eigencentrality increased also. Same way, I try to understand how they move around during the business working hours. Now, during the evening times, there were areas where their trips decreased, and their eigencentrality increased. Now, in Gangnam area or Ogumdong and Cheonhodong area, rather the rank increased. So absolute number decreased, but centrality, comparative figure increased. So that was the change that I have witnessed. And Now, suddenly, I'm jumping into conclusion. So this is my conclusion first. New data available compared to the transportation data, the trip data based on the mobile ping gets rid of the blind spot embedded in the previous trip data from the credit card transaction or sample survey and shows the potential to be adopted as a major data source for policy making. A new trip data set may be more useful while it can be extended attributes or mover. COVID-19 pandemic reduced the number of the trips maximum over 30% than normal weekdays. This is caused by the new confirmed infected and distancing policies. As the vaccinated are increased, the number of the trips lost sensitivity to the infections of the policies. The trip network dramatically loses large number of the links, especially in the evening, of females and the younger. Most of the city centers lose their centrality during the pandemic. Nevertheless, some centers gain centrality relative to it. Absolutely. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Those of you who are listening to this forum, some of you might be expert, but some who are interested in big data so have joined that. One of the uniqueness of the big data is really difficult to understand at one time. So if you would like to have a deeper understanding, please make sure to visit Open Data Platform, and we are also uploading all the materials. So make sure to confirm all of these data. So we will go to the next speaker.
Now we are going to talk about a study on economic vulnerability to infectious disease of commercial areas. And research fellow Kim Minyoung from Korea Credit Guarantee Foundation will be making the presentation. Good afternoon. I'll talk about our study on economic vulnerability to infectious disease in commercial areas. As the COVID-19 pandemic prolongs, the small business owners are suffering greatly. Their revenue is going down and many of them are closing their business. And based on the assumption that such problems might be repeated in the future, we thought that we needed to make proactive preventive measures to minimize economic damage. So we have decided to identify commercial areas that are especially vulnerable to pandemic and studied what kind of response strategies would be most appropriate. In foreign countries, they have developed community vulnerability index. Government institutions or schools or research institutes have developed this vulnerability index, and such research have made a lot of progress, but there were very few research focused on economic vulnerability. The other research focused mainly on infection vulnerability. But our study has focused on economic damage that small business owners suffered to develop economic vulnerability map. So there were two previous studies that studied economic vulnerability, and they were at national level, not at the individual commercial region. And they were not based on vulnerability assessment framework. They could not reflect the sensitivity and adaptive capacity. Over the past 20 years, there has been vulnerability-related research, and I have reviewed related climate change literature, and then we realized that the goal of vulnerability assessment can lead to difference in definition and approach to vulnerability. And there's the final point approach and starting point approach. Two different approaches. Vulnerability is the negative impact that remains after the system is exposed to difficulty. Starting point approach is when risk is highly uncertain and prediction is practically impossible. So instead of focusing on predicting the future, the focus is on enhancing the system by making up for the vulnerability of the system to make the system most resilient to any future potential challenges. So I thought the starting point approach was more useful for our research. So starting approach, our goal was to develop economic vulnerability index for individual commercial area. And this is based on sensitivity and adaptive capability. Sensitivity is the level of impact on system. Adaptive capability is for the system to adapt to the potential damage and respond and catch the opportunities to recover. We have to assess the internal characteristics of commercial areas. So we have developed our indices based on 2019 number. And the scope was the alley commercial areas, traditional commercial areas. So we looked at 1,490 commercial areas. And we only looked at 100 close to life business types. This is the type of data that we used, the data that we had internally and data we got from external sources like database of businesses, credit assurance foundations, credit assurance or credit guarantee data, Shinhan cards, sales data. There are two types of vulnerability index, sensitivity and adaptive capability. And the higher the number, the higher the vulnerability. And there is the physical sensitivity, customer sensitivity, and fixed cost sensitivity. For physical sensitivity, we assume that the shock was bigger when the commercial area scale was bigger. And we also looked at the types of business that is very sensitive to viral infection. And we looked at customer sensitivity. When the pandemic breaks out, people reduce their spending for leisure activities. So the commercial areas that depend on entertainment on weekends or evening was especially vulnerable. And tourism and tourist-related commercial areas is also very sensitive to pandemic. And as for fixed cost sensitivity, we looked at the amount of cost that small business owners have to spend. And if they had especially high share of rental cost or debt, we thought they would be especially sensitive. And as for adaptive capability indices, we looked at management capability, digital access capability, and financial funding capability. Management is if you have been in the business for a long time, you would have built more expertise and funding. So we have estimated the average business period, and digital adaptive companies probably can cushion the shock better. So we thought about ways to measure this at the commercial area level. And we looked at Naver Smart Place registration numbers. And funding capability. In order to survive the crisis, the businesses needed financial capability. So in terms of their credit rating, we assess their funding capability. So each of these indices we multiply by 100, so it's a relative score. Vulnerability index is highly sensitive, and we also, there was reverse correlation with the adaptive capability. We applied same set of weights. This is a map of economic vulnerability. And as you can see, the red areas, the darker red areas shows higher level of vulnerability. 연신내, 불광천, and as you might have expected, Sinchon and Hongdae had very high sense of vulnerability. And also Itaewon commercial area was very vulnerable. So we looked at sensitivity and adaptive capability as well. This is sensitivity index. Gangnam, urban downtown area, large commercial areas showed high level of sensitivity, and college campuses also showed high sensitivity. As for adaptive capability, when you compare them to sensitivity index, this is the result of sensitivity. And the red areas are spread across the outskirts. So the downtown commercial areas seem to have less adaptive capability. So the commercial areas that lacked both in those adaptability and sensitivity showed high level of vulnerability. So we've looked at top 20 commercial areas with the highest level of vulnerability. Y-axis shows commercial areas, X-axis shows the vulnerability indices. The redder areas shows higher vulnerability. Each commercial area showed different areas of vulnerability. For example, Nuksakpyeong-yeok, the Itaewon commercial area, you will see these red boxes. For sensitivity and adaptability, they had low score. That is because in the Itaewon commercial area, they relied heavily on after work and weekend commercial activities and tourists. This is a tourist attraction, and the debt compared to revenue was high, and they had relatively short duration of business, lacking in business capability. However, Daerim Station, where there are a lot of commuters, they lacked in adaptive capability more than the sensitivity. And in spite of this high vulnerability, you have to have a deeper level understanding of what exactly they lack in to come out with tailored support programs. And we also looked at the bottom 20 commercial areas for vulnerability. The bluer areas are less vulnerable areas. As you can see, overall, these commercial areas have high adaptive capability and low percentage of fixed cost and low share of debt and rental cost. And these business owners tend to have longer duration of business. And Bangsan Complex Market, Mangwon World Cup Market, Yongsan Electronic Market, these were specialized markets and they showed low level of vulnerability. In the case of Bangsan, they specialized in packaging material and printing. Mangwon World Cup Market specializes in food ingredients and fruits. Yongsan specializes, of course, in electronic goods. So such specialized markets showed low level of vulnerability. And just like restaurant business, they are not as sensitive to infection as restaurant business. So I think that's why they showed low level of vulnerability. This picture on the right hand shows the fluctuation of annual revenue, and the redder areas have seen bigger declines in their sales revenue. And there was one exception to my conclusion. The downtown commercial areas showed redder areas, meaning they have seen decline in the revenue, but in vulnerability index, they were blue. So this was an exceptional commercial area. So I've thought about this commercial area, like Gwanghwamun, Insadong, Jonggak, Myeongdong. They have a lot of restaurants that's vulnerable to droplet infection, and they had high dependency on tourists. But because we have given equal weights to other factors, these areas showed low level of vulnerability. But depending on commercial areas, we might have to change the weights given to each factors of vulnerability. And vulnerability index, after we developed the index, we needed to verify the validity of this index. So we looked at vulnerability index by commercial area, annual fluctuation, and we looked at its correlation with the business closure. For vulnerability, we looked at data before the outbreak, and we looked at the revenue that was recorded during the pandemic. The blue dotted areas show clear results. The higher the vulnerability rate was, the closure rate went up and the sales revenue went down. So this has proven that vulnerability index is valid. And this is for the same set of data. We've looked at top 30% and bottom 30%, and we saw the revenue decline rate and closure rate in highly correlated commercial areas. The revenue went down by 4.3%, bottom 30%. The revenue actually went up by 26%. And correlation with the business shutdown, higher vulnerability areas showed higher rates of business closure. So we thought that our vulnerability index was valid. And we have developed economic vulnerability index for each commercial area, and we believe it could be a wonderful tool to support decision making. We can identify commercial areas that needs additional support, and we can also identify what kind of strength each commercial area should focus on building. And the government decision makers, experts, and citizens need to have more active communications about this. And this instrument or methodology can be replicated to outside of Seoul. And as for discussion points, vulnerability index is based on ranking. It's not an absolute score. It shows the relative position. In calculating the index, because of lack of sample, there were some indices that we could not calculate. And for data availability issue, we only looked at 100 industries. And for lack of quantitative data, there were some areas that were not covered. And we also have to look at the joint action capability of the business owners in crisis. But we lacked data, so we could not consider joint action capability. And the government social distancing measures also had a strong correlation with the economic damage, but this is an external factor. So I thought our focus was on identifying the internal attributes, so we did not consider social safety distancing measure here. Our future goal is to develop conversation-type monitoring instruments. Second, we wanted to carry out further research in order to identify what kind of elements makes a commercial area more economically vulnerable. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. She has talked about a study on economic vulnerability, and with this data, we can analyze the vulnerability of commercial areas. And I'm sure it's going to be a very helpful tool. Let me move on to the next presentation.
We have with us Deputy Director Kim Jun Ho from Data Business Team Shinhan. You know that data law is giving us huge implication, especially you might have a lot of questions. And the title of today's presentation is, you can see how utilization can happen in the pseudonymized information combination. Hello everyone, I was just introduced by the moderator. I am Deputy Director Kim Jun Ho from Shinhan Card. I work at a data business team. Well, unlike the three presenter, I'll be talking about something else. The three previous speakers talked about what are they doing, especially from the Seoul Metropolitan City point of view. In my case, what I'm going to talk about is, as you know, data utilization is possible, especially combining the data is possible after the adoptions and the revisions of the three Data Act. So my perspective would be a little bit different than the three previous speakers. Last year, August 2020, you know, the data utilizations and data industrialization revitalizations has happened by enforcing the revisions of the three Data Act. And there was a judgment and various kinds of the data new deal was adopted. Not only the government, but also the private sector tried to come up with a different approach. The core essence of the Three Data Act is safely, securely protecting the private data and overall data, but also utilizing those data in a more efficient and effective manner. And also we have the Data Administration Act, which means that in the public area, all government ministries can systematically utilize the data, and they can provide a support using network and establish policy, evaluate the policies. So these are what is happening right now. And including Shinhan Card, SKT, and Lotte, LG Electronic, all of these cases have gathered together and they came up with a private data dam called grain data. And you can see that this grain data is for the purpose of the private sector, which means that each company has his or its own data, but instead of using their own data, if we combine the data, the efficiency can be huge. So even though they know that it's much effective efficiency because of the lack of the law or legal background, they weren't able to combine the law. But with the adoptions and effectiveness of the Three Data Act, all of these private sectors have agreed to build a grand data dam. And most representative companies have gathered together. Let me introduce who are the members of the Grand Data Dam. Among the telco operator, we have SK Telecom. Among the credit card company, Shinhan Card. Among the credit bureau, KCB has joined. Other than that, like distribution, manufacturing, PG company, other company, real estate, ICT, all of these companies have joined. As you know, the core member of the Grand Data, SK Telecom, Shinhan Card, and KCB, they are the most representative company who've been very active in collecting and utilizing the data for the past few decades. And they have using the collected data separately. They've done a lot of analysis so far, not only the private company, but public organization, including Seoul Metropolitan City. We've done a lot of analysis, but in each cases, they have done their own statistic analysis, but now they have upgraded their statistic. They've combined all of these data now. In case of Korea, you know that most of these companies are large conglomerates, and they, in a way, as a monopoly, they are dominating the market. But most of the time, Korean companies have really high quality data, like 27 million SK Telecom, Shinhan Card, 28 million of the data. We have that. So if we combine these data statistically, then heterogeneous data such as distribution, manufacturers by spatial unit can be combined as well. Now let me touch upon the statistical combination, because statistical combination is very important. The greatest benefit is there are no limitation, and I can elaborate later on, but the legal background, the provisions, the process must be complied with, the scope range of utilization is also limited. But if we combine the statistic data, we can definitely use it. So each company has its own statistic data, and in a very standardized methodology, we are applying our ways and then produce more data, and then statistical unit data products are launched now. And also, spatial unit combination can be another great advantage, because each company has spatial combination data, like each unit by unit, so they can produce it, and all different kinds of spatial unit data, when they are gathered together, tens, hundreds, and thousands, we can produce a greater insight. So these benefits, it's not easy to do so, but especially the statistical combinations of the data is very, very helpful. Numerous manufacturing and distribution company, they comply with the same statistical criteria. They can combine the data. I'll give one example. You can see in this slide that there's a space, and the standardized data segments are input and calculated, and at the same time, so-called mesh up, we call that as a mesh up. They are doing a mesh up, and they watch it together, and they can get the insight. For example, the population movement in Gangnam area, and the shops and retail sales in certain area. So spatial unit can be applied here. Now, retail, capital, and data, we can identify which area the youngsters spend a lot of money, or spend their purchased goods, and we can come up with this spatial data. All kinds of data can be created. Exponentially, we can produce data. So based on the source data, raw data, we can continuously make additional data. Not only the raw data, but also cleaned data, processed data can also be produced. And the previous speakers talked about that as well. Now, the theme of today's topic, which I will start from now, is pseudonomy combination. Well, you know that the core essence of the Data Act is protecting the privacy, and among that, another core essence is the pseudonomy combination. So ABC company has its own information and data, and based on the agreement from each individual, they gather the information, and then if they transcend the boundary, then they can transform their data into pseudonym data, and the law allow that to do that. So within the three goals, they can do that. scientific purpose, or second, commercial, statistical, and public goods and public records. So within these three area, even though they didn't get the approval or agreement, they can definitely use this data. So the grant data in the Global Alliance, we've tried this. So we have developed a data product. The most representative, three companies, pseudonomy combined data-based product were developed. In KCB, you know that the credit informations are there, like auto lease, debt, all kinds of things, and more than 200 data set can be brought from Shinhan card. Each individual consumption, life stage, patterns, consumption, retail purchase patterns, the preference, hobbies. So more than 70 items were collected. In case of SK Telecom, their mobile phone data, their movement, and also their interests through the customer's search engine. So these information belong to each company, but we have combined them, and around 15 million items came into being. So the meaning of the 50 million means that each individual we can explain in various ways. In the past, the time and space, we transcended that and we were able to analyze that. But on the contrary, pseudonomy combined data means we can have a lot of data about one individual. So 15 million pseudonomy combined data. That means in a very different dimensional information can be gathered. But here the core essence is we don't know who this people is. That's the pseudonomy technology. And if we know who that person is, then legally it's not allowed to use that. And these combined data can also be used within the legally allowed range. So we have combined this data in pseudonymic way, and we aren't going to do it once only or temporary thing, but we'll continuously do that. KCB and SKT and Shinhan Card, not only with three, but also we are trying to combine our data with other companies, and by doing that, we can create additional value. And this is going beyond the raw data, and if we continue to research, I'm sure that we can come up with a very meaningful different kinds of the data. That is our belief. And if we do that, we will continuously produce the product, whether it's a private or public. Definitely, our analysis can be provided as a service provisions, and that is our research purpose. From now, I'll be talking to you about the trends that we are working and what kind of result have we enjoyed after we've done analysis. So I'll give one example. We've done diverse analysis, but we wanted to understand the property or special characteristics of the high-end customer. And well, out of the two big data forum, today this session is the last session, and among the high-end data, KCB, SK, and Shinhan Card, we have found out the common customer, which are 6.4 million, and out of 6.4 million, because KCB has the income data and total income, and Shinhan Card we have consumption data, but KCB has the total consumptions of the credit card or expenditure of the credit card. So the top 1% we define as a high-end and 10% premium customer. The remaining, they are the average customers. So we try to analyze their propensity, their features, and let me tell you what those are. The high-end customers, the top 1%, so their average annual income is about 160 million, and their credit card usage is about 72 million. Their total asset is 2.8 billion. Well, the figure is much smaller than we expected. And in the process of gathering the data, probably the customers whose consumption level is 10 billion or 100 billion, it was hidden. But those outliers, like their income level is like 150 billion, there is a possibility that their privacy can be disclosed. So we don't collect those data. We have set the ceiling cap. So together with the data professional company, we have set the cap. So I believe that it could be much higher. So this is the overhaul, and the income, the card consumptions, and total asset is this. So where do they live? We have analyzed this. Most of them live in the metropolitan area. Of course, there are some in Busan area, but mostly they live in Seoul Metropolitan area. And we try to understand the number of the customers. So you can see definitely number one is Gangnam, Seocho, Songpa. So these are 1, 2, 3 figure high-end customer. Ulsan City and Daegu Suyoung district. So Namgu is regarded as Gangnam of Seoul Metropolitan City, and Suyeong is regarded as Daegu, most affluent city. And now we try to analyze the MG high-end customers, around 2,000 high-end young clients. Mostly they live within Seoul Metropolitan City, and they don't live at all in other city than Seoul City. Of course, from these data that we have gathered, we found that by 20 to 30 years old age group, they live in Seoul Metropolitan age. And what's interesting is that Gangnam, Seocho, mostly they live, but in Hwaseong city of Gyeonggi, it's the second area. So high-end customers reside there. We try to understand why people live there, so I try to look at that. According to CNN, in 2025, Hwaseong will become the most affluent, the fourth most affluent. They have Hyundai, Kia, these startup companies. About more than 10,000 companies, startup companies are there. That's why they have this statistic. That's our prediction. So we try to analyze them, as you can see from this slide. How do we segmentize that? First, KCB has all kinds of data of Korean people, because right after the credit card crisis in early 2000, you know that credit card information is very important. We analyzed that with economic active populations, about 43 million data collected by KCB, and based on that, we have categorized top 1% and top 10% premium customers, and also gender-wise, MZ generations, and also senior middle-aged people and the silver generations. And also the characteristic, more than 60 factors were analyzed, and about 150 million factors were analyzed. And this is most effective way to analyze that. And we have identified 18 items and Shinhan card 24, SKT 24. So total of 66 items were analyzed. In case of KCB, income, credit card, consumption, and net capital, and Shinhan card, their consumption by items. And SKT, mobile phone information, movement information, and mobile app search information. So all of these six information, we have processed that and came up with the result. So let me introduce a couple of things. Of course, this is a matter of course, but their investment interest is really high. Blockchain, real estate are really high, especially security, high-end, especially senior to middle-aged people were interested. And in case of security, high-end premium or top 1%, they were definitely interested in security or stock investment. But KCB, they have the data about the actual possessions of their houses, and high-end female silver female, especially among the high-end, the female, they have the highest rate of the house possessions. And high-end silver, they have a great interest. And this is quite interesting as well. Now SKT try to understand what are their interests in the luxurious goods and Starbucks and also the overseas trip. We have compared that by Shinhan card and luxury product interest. We expect it to be really high, but actually not really. I mean, premium customers and high-end customer, not much differences. And MZ generation, 20 to 30 years old, regardless of their income or consumption, MZ generation has much greater interest in the luxurious good. But those who travel a lot to Jeju Island or overseas in terms of taking action, high-end customers have absolute interest. So having interest and actual spending is very different because disposable income level is very different than actual spending. They all have a high interest about the luxurious good, but they cannot afford to pay that. So the consumption is different. But if you look at the Starbucks consumption, there could be a minor differences, but high end or premium, their customer they don't have much differences. But 20 to 30 years old MZ generation, their spending at Starbucks are definitely higher than any other generation. High-end customers, we wanted to understand whether they prefer iPhone or Android phone, because absolutely there's a high percentage of people who use Android, but there's not much differences about the iPhone preference. High-end or premium, they don't have much differences, but rather female MZ generations, they have a high possibility or high preference of using iPhone. In case of MZ, female, for the 20 to 30 years old, for them, the number one retail or the possible luxurious item that they'd like to use is iPhone. On the contrary, culture, leisure, travel, we try to identify that because Shinhan card, we have this information about sports, culture, leisure, accommodations, and five-star hotels, and SKT, they have movement or trips information like during the weekend. So we have analyzed that. And people who moves around during the weekend is mostly male, middle-aged, especially those who are interested in the five-star hotel, MZ generation. Regardless of their gender, they are all interested in high-end hotel, which means that the high-income level people, they would like to go to hotel, not only just staying there one night, but as a networking place, they go to hotels. Now, regarding the beauty area, definitely high-end female, they spend a lot of money, like department stores. But what's interesting is that among the high-end, MZ generation is also very much interested in beauty area. So they can afford to pay that, and also their income level is quite high. So the 20 to 30 years old male generations are also interested in beauty product or beauty things. Sorry. Now, in case of the leisure area, it's quite different. Depending on their consumptions, middle-aged people like 40 to 50 years old, they spend more money. Not high-end or premium, but the ordinary level, common people, they spend a lot of money. So 20 to 30-year-old female, iPhone and Starbucks are most preferred ones. So within the limited consumption level, these are the most preferred area where they would like to spend that. But 40 to 50 years old male people, male, they'd like to visit drinking places and also spend money there. So these are the individual characteristics, and we've done clustering and classifications, and also we've done some expectations. What I'd like to introduce is that the classification analysis among 66 factors, relations with the investment or house possessions, real estate, blockchain, or stocks, we regarding them as an area of the investment, and department stores or luxurious products. So something that they like to enjoy, we have put a name, High Life Index. We have come up with this name, and then we divide it into 4 groups again. So they are extremely interested in making investment, but at the same time, they'd like to enjoy their life, to spend the money as much as possible to buy the luxurious products. And also they are very much concentrated in the investment. We call them as self-fund mania. And now those who are eager to spend the money, we call them as beautiful lifer. And gold eagles are the people whose interest we cannot understand. Maybe they pay by cash, or probably they would like to just enjoy their own life. And based on this, we also came up with the following conclusion. High-tech player are 25, beautiful lifer 25, and cell-phone mania. Also, you can see that only excluding MZ generations, we have come up with this. And high-tech player and beautiful lifer are quite high. So maybe it was well reflected. And among the diverse analysis, Seoul and Busan people, we extracted them, we tried to analyze, but not much differences. Maybe Seoulites, they enjoy consumption more, especially people who live in Seoul and high-end customers, they spend more. But like business people or high-end educator, they have their uniqueness. Among the high-end, we extracted people who own their own business. And the self-fund mania was very, very low because they have their own business and they concentrate everything to their own business. And now, education area, I myself also, my children will become the senior of the high school, and I am salaryman, which means that my disposable income is limited, and if education goes up, other consumption should be decreased. So that's a normal trend. And high-end education consumption, we try to extract these people and try to understand that. Once again, high tech is 43%, and compared to other area, they are spending a lot of money. They enjoy a lot their life. They have a great fun. So this is my analysis. What I mean by that is high-end customers, their disposable income is very different. So they spend a lot of money for the education. That doesn't mean that they are reducing their consumption in other areas. So these are the summarizations of my analysis, but I'll skip this. And today, the contents that I have explained, about 15 million items we have reduced to 66 items, and we have focused on the high-end customers. But not only that, we can analyze in various ways, and depending on what kind of item we want to know about, it could be policy issues, it could be various other issues. So from various angles, we can analyze that, and we can even do the predictive modeling. And because this is huge big data, so whatever kind of exploratory analysis, we can do that. And each individual basis, we can do that. So based on that, this is our proposal. So pseudonymic combined data, we can constantly extract value, and we hope to gather more diverse information so that we can create a better, more valuable data. So this grand data product or data dam, we can establish strategy for the market, and not only that, and they want to use this for the marketing purpose, because if they stop at the analysis itself, it's meaningless. They want to do more. They want to use the insight and use it for the marketing purpose. And we need to constantly develop that and develop the service. In the public area, I'm sure that we can use that. We have used it for the statistical purpose so far, and the Samaringula that I have introduced is also, and also commercial information was explained by the Seoul Institute. Yes, we need to use it more effectively and efficiently in an in-depth manner. So in the individual level, we can do further research and use the research result for policy decision making. Of course, we need to make sure that privacy needs to be well protected, and for that, we will promote to other businesses as well. That concludes my presentation, and thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Director Kim. It was the hottest topic, so pseudonymic combined information presentation was just completed. Now, we have received the questions.
토론 주제를 좀 보니까
And infection and data openness, the role of public and private sectors were the main areas of questions. And we are joined by experts from the academia, private sector, and public sector. So in terms of the limitation of open sharing of public data and our future direction, that's what we wish to talk about. And then we'll talk about the future plans and how the infection can be represented in these data. First, Director Yoon Ji-suk from Statistics Korea will talk about the future plans for sharing data. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the speakers for their wonderful presentation. And there was a lot of encouraging parts for the Statistics Korea. And when it comes to combining the private sector with the public sector, we are trying our best to provide granular data. And we are accelerating such efforts these days. And one of the things that we are working on is for disaster relief fund and the shortage of mask supply that we experienced early last year. We are providing a Nowcast portal now, and it will be information about 10 indices in several sectors using the public and private sector data, so that at least monthly level data can be used to update. And our national statistics, there are 1,400 types of statistics, and 60% of the data are annual basis. So whenever we feel we are in an urgent situation like COVID-19 pandemic, these data were not frequent enough. So Statistics Korea is trying to use big data to come out with speedy and more granular level of data. And we have introduced the experimental statistics based on mobile data, and our mobility data is registered as #1 experiment data, and it is open to the public now. For experimental statistics, we'll introduce this for 3 years, and for it to move on to the next stage, it needs to resolve many of the inherent problems that private sector has. Like the data has unique characteristics or unique constraints, and also there could be some issues related to interpretation of data, but we haven't touched them yet. It might sound like big data would solve other problems, which of course is not true. Like credit card data, of course it's a great information, but if you had one transaction at Burger King, that location, the branch, store, that information is not available. So the data itself has some restrictions. So interpreting the usage pattern based on the data certainly has its limits. And what kind of efforts private sector is making to overcome such limits should also be shared. And KCB data, asset, income data is available, but is it at the household level or at individual level? If somebody owns a property, like if out of a family of 4 people, only one person might own this and the remaining 3 people might not be owners of the property. So we have to see how the ownership was estimated and what is the level of credibility that we can assign. That all that information should be made available, and our department will be working harder to combine public and private sector data to come out with highly reliable statistics. Thank you very much.
그 학계에서도 아마 이렇게
At school, openness and pseudonymic combinations of the information. I'm sure that you must have your own views. Yes, from the academic circle, pseudonymic information combined are hot topic. Is it differential privacy or what it is? Office of the Statistic is making a lot of investment, and one of the reason is because in New York City, you know that based on the taxi operation track record, they have opened that, and you know that Jessica Alba, very famous actress, there was a photo taken by the paparazzi, and it's a digital information, so location is revealed. So they have used this data, and they know when she rode a taxi, and Jessica Alba did not pay the tip. Such a famous actress did not pay the tip. So there was a sort of a breach of the private information. When we analyze that, we talk about average or overall trend, but we would like to hide the private information. That's why we came up with a differentiated data protection. And another one is a localized private information. They want to know how people are using emoji, and Apple doesn't know and doesn't want to know the each individual information. They know the overall trend, but not the each individual number of the emoji that people use. So differential data protection, if it's well used, then we can come up with the best way to use the big data, and we can actively use the pseudonymic information. And by combining the data, most sensitive data is medical records, especially it can be abused, or they believe that their insurance cost can go up. What's interesting is that the pseudonymic information is not applied to the medical record, but a very different approach is applied. The medical hospitals, they have their own database, but it's not uniformed. So they try to come up with a more uniformed platform, and using the same analysis methodology, they will be sharing the information. So it's not sharing the data, but the analytic model will be shared. So we live in the era of the data, and people have expectation and concern as well. And by using various ways, we can make most of the data, I believe.
감사합니다.
Thank you. I have a question to Professor No. Data protection and data opening. What should be the level of data openness that researchers are looking for? And in terms of security, can you go any level higher? First of all, I would like to thank the 4 speakers for their wonderful presentation. The value of public data and the usage of data, but you have asked me about the openness of data.
쪽은 솔직히 연구자의 욕심이라면
Pseudonymy and our ambition is to look at the most raw data. And then any data that can be processed, people want to process this by themselves. But the researchers are also aware of the limits. And if you can process the data as you want, and if you can have the access to data, that would be great. Big Data Campus of Seoul City and remote support service, and if we can at least have raw data in those platforms, that's the most desirable situation for researchers. For pseudonym combination, of course, we can link it with the other information, and the individual level combination requires many more experiments and tests because there are still some risk factors. And combining by unit could be important, and having more detailed understanding of the unit could be important. If people think that the data could be combined at individual level thanks to pseudonym, but nobody knows all the risk factors. And in that regard, combining data at a certain level and using that information and accumulating such information, I think, is more realistic. Thank you very much. Pseudonym combination, and one of the other question was about QR check-in information and how the floating population data can be managed. Seoul Metropolitan government does not have a specific plan yet, but it is sharing COVID-related data. And whether it can be shared through pseudonyms, but it's something that we need to think about. And KCB, as we heard about pseudonym and how it should be tried. Can you share your trials and errors and challenges? So in your project, can you explain that?
네, 안녕.
Hello everyone, I'm from KCB. My name is Park Mo-kyung. Thank you very much. The presentation by 4 speakers were extremely insightful. Thank you. Recently, Shinhan Card, Mr. Kim, you have done a great job in explaining that. And data dam, you talked about it. And we are in the process of developing that. More recently, the public authorities and private companies, when we introduce the case studies, the most frequent questions that I get, I think I need to explain that. And pseudonymic combinations of the information, people are not familiar with that. And they believe that when they get this pseudonymic combined information, is it identifiable or unidentifiable? They always ask the questions, as you mentioned. The name itself, do not try to identify who this information it belongs to, because there's a strong penalty, like 3% of the total revenue. So make sure that you should not try to identify that in our case, KCB, through the data special company, we always undergo the verifications. And of course, in case of the pseudonymic data, not all the law provisions is applied, but we also have the upper cap and lower cap. And we delete the information so that people will not be able to identify who they are. One of the most frequently asked question is the address. So according to the guideline, we go all the way to the administration district. Of course, depending on your research purpose, you can take a different approach. But if I say that we don't have a strict rules, but depending on the research purpose, there could be different, like public data, private data, etc. And depending on the block basis or unit basis, you can also carry out research. And if you ask me, I can explain further. And also, you can come up with a statistic and then take that out. For example, due to your necessity, you leave the block and ID alive. You don't erase that, and then you promise that you will sign a contract or something like that so that you will not identify that, then you can take those data out. Another frequently asking question is about the combination key and combination ratio. Private company cases, the name, date of birth, mobile phone, there are all the details. So the combinations of company, their information are quite high, but public authority or public agency, especially the public authority that have the communication channel to talk to the to the customers or citizens, they can easily combine that. So these are for your reference. So you don't have to use just one combination key, but you can add various things like name if there are overlapping, and then on top of that you can use the mobile phone, the last 4 digits. So you can apply different skills to make a combined data. Last but not least, no matter what, data has been revised and you can combine. So when you do the pseudonymic information combination, especially my company is a credit company, and the financial institution, they do a lot of combination job of the data, and most of the data, actually 70% of the informations are combined from the credit bureau. Among the public authority, there are a lot of cases by Korea Road and Korea Railway organizations and KCB. We have tried to combine our own data. In the future, we don't have any cases of the public authority combining their own data, but we'll try to do that so that more data can be realized and better result can come. Thank you.
감사합니다. 이제 시작 단계이다 보니
Thank you. This is the beginning stage. So there's a lot of challenges and things to be handled. There was one question about the presentation. After COVID-19 outbreak, the consumption pattern change has changed the commercial area. What would be the future expected change? Dr. Kim Minyoung, can you talk about this? Given the vulnerability pattern, how do you think the commercial areas of Seoul will change going forward? During the COVID-19 era, how we have analyzed the vulnerability of commercial areas. During the pandemic, many people shopped online, and such changes expected to have a lot of impact on the commercial areas. As we say, we are normalizing our lives, but almost 4,000 new cases were identified today. So there are some people are saying that social distancing measures might be elevated. And I'll continue to study this area. we cannot be certain about what kind of changes will take place.
감사합니다. 사실 뭐 예측이
And prediction is something that is quite challenging. It would be very difficult to talk about that. But given the vulnerability index, I think we can apply this in various ways. Next question. As for the opening of public data and big data, public sectors is coming up with data that everybody can use, and everybody feel obligated to use data one way or another, but we need to train people to do that. And we need to make further efforts. So Professor Chang Won-chul, can you talk about what can we do to handle this? For the public sector, we definitely need many more data analysts. And data parallel, we need to find the right process for hiring people. And the people, in order to be government workers, they have to take some examination to become public officials. But these talents are quite talented, and they can easily find their jobs in private sector. So it's difficult for the government to find and recruit the right people. And the public institutions, when it comes to providing information, they need to have some kind of incentives. Private sector companies have clear goals, but public sectors are afraid of providing data because if something goes wrong, the officials have no incentives but only to be punished. So in many cases, because of the 3 data protection laws, the data must be processed before being provided. These are additional jobs. So there should be other separate groups of people who work on processing the data, who are dedicated to doing this. But if it becomes additional work to existing people, it's not going to be easy. So we should hire more data experts. We should have a separate team dealing with data processing. And then have a dedicated department for data sharing. And Army has created big data evaluation organization. Even the Army is moving faster than the government organizations.
마지막
Last question. So private sector, right after the revisions of the Data 3 Acts, in order to utilize the data, working together with the public authority, were there any challenges for you to collaborate with the public authority? If you do have, Deputy Director Kim Jun Ho, could you elaborate? What challenges have you faced? Well, I am Kim Jun Ho from Shinhan Card. Which area needs to be ironed out, or which challenge needs to be eradicated? Instead of saying that, I believe continuous consultative body or cooperation is extremely important. I guess forum like today is very meaningful. Korea has announced Digital New Deal, and we announced that we'll build 16 platform, data network, data dam, AI. We are making a lot of investment. The government is taking the initiative. Government is playing important role, and the private companies, small and medium-sized companies are also trying hard, and the solution companies, AI systems, they are a lot of companies that are making efforts, and well, we hope that the private companies and the public authority, they suffer from lack of talented people who are specialized in big data analysis. Of course, the companies or the organizations, they have their own data, but look at Google, Amazon, Apple, the global so-called the top leading global company, they have enormous big data, and it's not their data is not limited to a certain region or certain country, but they have the data of the whole world, and they need to develop it, and then they are strengthening their dominant position, and Korea needs to catch that up, and also the more competent data-related companies. I hope to see more of that, and I hope the government needs to constantly communicate with the private company, and then when they make decisions after communicating with the company, then we can produce a great result. As a person working in this area, including Shinan God, Grant Data Dam, we will collaborate. Thank you.
이번 세션
Thank you. In this session, we have talked about potential and role of big data after COVID-19. In this big data era, the big data is an irreversible trend, and we have to put our heads together to come up with various alternatives. And thank you very much for your attention.